Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the Horror Survival Guide, where I, the laziest writer, teach you how to survive horror scenarios one video game at a time. Today, we're learning the do's and don'ts of surviving Resident Evil 7, which features marauding mold monsters, a psychic ghost child with a psycho family, and, worst of all, a cake that just explodes before you can have any.
What? But you can't do this to me.
You know how much I sacrificed?
So beware major spoilers for Resident Evil 7, and then let's get started. So first things first, let's do a quick reminder of the events of the game. You play as Ethan, who got a message from his missing wife Mia directing him to this old plantation house in Louisiana. Inside, you find her, which is more than the ghost hunting show who were there before you managed, but then she goes crazy and tries to kill you. You commit some nasties and she dies, but then she's like,
Psych!
And saws your hand off. You commit some more nasties and she dies again, but then Jack captures you, feeds you human meat, and accidentally gives you a chance to escape. Oh, and if you're wondering how you managed to get your hand back after Mia took your Captain Hook cosplay a little too seriously, well...
People say that time heals all wounds.
After getting help from a cop, who dies a little more permanently, you kill Jack a few times until he's dead. At this point, you start to suspect that these near-invincible cannibals who don't think twice about cutting each other's limbs off might not be your average family. Anyway, the mum is a bug, but you have bug spray, and the son is into puzzles of the ouchie variety. You get a cure to the virus thing that I forgot to mention, but you need it, or something. But then you're forced to use half of it to permanently put down Mega Jack. So then you have to choose who gets the cure out of Mia and the last of the Baker family who isn't a big meanie. You then go and kill this little girl / old lady, Evelyn, who was the reason for all of the badness, and everything returns to normal. Oh, and Mia was secretly an agent of an organisation who had to accompany Evelyn, and that's why she went missing. Clear? No? Good. I went into some more detail in my video on how the game revitalised the horror of the Resident Evil series, but to be honest I'm not sure you'll need to be too clear for this one. Moving on. Rule number 1 is simple. Don't. Yeah, immediately we're confronted with a fundamental rule that Ethan should have stuck to. Mia's not all that great. In fact,
She's very plain.
and she was lying to you the whole time, so there's really no need to go to Louisiana. I mean, I thought it was bad when Emily from Until Dawn chased her sister out into the snow. This guy's driven like 2,000 miles to a place full of alligators and Louisianans, both of which apparently eat people. So, side rule, never go to Louisiana. Or anywhere where you're, at best, 4th in the food chain. But if you must go, let's say your wife has a really good brownie recipe that you want to get before she dies, you should always bring backup. Why would you come here alone? You've seen what happens when you do this, Ethan. Silent Hill 2 has been out for 16 years at this point. Also, in this universe there have been zombie and monster outbreaks all over the world, destroying multiple cities in the process. So why would you go anywhere on your own? Bring someone with you, and preferably someone slower. And tastier. Okay, but what if you've ignored both of those rules right off the bat? Let's just say, I don't know, you really want to keep that recipe a secret so that when you get back home you can make some serious brownie bank. Well, then my first piece of advice would be to wear some durable gloves, because in all honesty, a decent pair of gauntlets would prevent around 99% of the harm that can come to you in the bayou. Swamp Thing got shit on my 14th century battle armor. The next rule is actually a little sidestep to another perspective, because not all of you who end up in a similar situation will be main character contenders. No, some of you will be Clancy, the cameraman for paranormal investigation show Sewer Gators, which is a very misleading name that won't be beneficial to attracting more viewers, which is probably why your camera quality is so poor. It's almost like if you had a YouTube channel about video games and called it The Laziest Writer. Who would do such a thing? Anyway, Clancy, my guy, don't do ghost shows in places where people are actively disappearing at a rate of like 10 victims per year. It's not a ghost, it's a murderer. Like, every single time. Like, yeah, I know that he's there so that Ethan can survive by watching his tapes back later, but honestly, fuck Ethan, you're here to learn how to survive. So, just don't go in there to begin with. The same rule goes for Peter and Andre over there. Okay, so weirdly enough, I remembered that one of those guys was called Andre and decided to make a Peter Andre joke, because I'm a hack. And then I looked it up and the other dude is genuinely called Peter. Anyway, after you find Mia and get the recipe, you're going to want to go home. Unfortunately, Mia has figured out your money-making scheme and realizes that in order to keep the brownie fortune for herself, you need to die. After you've killed her once, she's going to be somewhat annoyed with you and will probably resort to chainsaw mode. This is where you'll seriously regret having broken another rule, which is lift. Bruh. You see how you're trying to pull that screwdriver out of your hand? You could definitely get out of this situation if only you'd been on the roids. So stock up on those protein shakes, boyos. Or at least invest in your one-handed skill for when you're inevitably left a little bit stumpy. Bet you wish you had some friends now, huh? It would also probably be helpful to be a bit more resourceful than you are. Not necessarily at like Amanda Ripley levels, but you're going to be bleeding out pretty soon, so it would be useful if you could quit just throwing magic first aid juice all over the floor every time you need healing. Or worse, forget the button scheme of your arms. New canon. Ethan Winters is secretly Scrappy-Doo in a human suit, and that's why his arms have a button scheme. Whew, really wrote myself into a sticky situation for a moment there. One key rule that applies throughout the first few hours of the game is get out! There are so many ways to escape these houses that don't involve collecting doghead puzzle pieces, or murdering your self-defensing your wife in a duel to the death. I mean, look at the windows, look at the balcony. Come on, are you honestly going to avoid a perfectly good opportunity to escape because of some innate desire to finish the groovy puzzle door and prove yourself to the weird cannibal family? Or because of some random stranger that you've never even seen telling you that the only exit is via the attic? That doesn't even make sense. What kind of builder would do that? Just leave. And taking another piece of advice from Get Out, I would seriously suggest that you tell someone where you're going. Worst case scenario, you can wait in one of those safe rooms for 3 days until someone comes looking for you.
Where'd you go?
Trying to butter you up a little bit.
There you are! Claire, where'd you go?
Like Mr. X, Jack respects your safe room privilege far too much to come knocking whilst you're in there, so you should just be able to wait it out. Alas, if you're like Ethan, you'll just be a bit of a loner who's come out here without any sense that something might be wrong. He's not the sharpest tool in the shed. That said, help will arrive at some point, in the form of a cop who'll give you a penknife about which you should be incredibly grateful, because Ethan is not, and it turns out to be the most useful tool that you'll have from here on out. That's not actually a rule, it's just like common courtesy. What is a rule is get help, which applies when the cop is all like, "What's happening to you? Should I call for backup?" To which Ethan responds,
"Wouldn't you like to know, weather boy?"
So yeah, maybe actually take the opportunity to request assistance wherever you can. Such as when you find a phone. Or 12. Luckily, Ethan has learnt by the end of the game, and gladly accepts the crucial help of... You're not Chris Redfield. Ah, that's much better. Anyway, the cop dies in the garage, but come on. You're telling me this guy looked back and still didn't even see a 6'2" dude with a shovel about to take the top half of his head off? Why are horror characters always so anti-optician? Jack's the only sensible one here, wearing his glasses like a good boy. If there were any justice in this world, he would have lived. And those glasses would probably help you out in the old house, because otherwise you'll be squinting a lot under the light of the lanterns and candles that are used to light every room except the secret basement in the fireplace. The fact that Marguerite, who occupies the old house, doesn't follow you into this secret hidey hole is evidence that she isn't aware of its existence, which I think is proven by her insistence on carrying a crappy gas lantern like some lighthouse keeper from the early 1800s. You see, Lucas does have access to this area, which isn't full of bugs or anywhere near as mouldy as the rest of the old house. Clearly they're hiding this place from Marguerite, because she hates electricity. Actually, come to think of it, there are quite a lot of Amish vibes going on. Okay, admittedly I'm not too clear on what Amish people really do. I mean, most of my knowledge comes from that song, but what are they gonna do? Come on YouTube and give me hate? Not likely. So in the old house they shun electricity. Jack is a man of the land into discipline who goes around with a beard on his chin. His mind is gone. They work hard and sacrifice a lot to try and get you killed. Lucas laughs his head off when you burn in hell. Evelyn wears black with no buttons. There's no way these guys are paying their phone bills. There's certainly no motor car after what happens in the garage. There's no cops or traffic lights, and it certainly bites. And Lucas does raise a barn, in a sense. Also, there are most certainly 1 or 2 instances of Jack getting medieval on Ethan's hiney. So, bring a taser. They won't come near you. Unfortunately, the mold men in the basement and the mines are not as averse to the modern world, but as long as you bring some black mold remover, you should be fine. On that note, I would also suggest coming equipped with some sanitizer, because, not to be rude, but this place is a little... Meh. I really don't trust that food.
He's not eating it, Jack! He's not eating it!
Shut the hell up, Marguerite!
Also, there's only really one main rule for Lucas's section, primarily because it's the worst part of the game.
You're tacky and I hate you.
So I'll drop that here real quick. Trust nobody. If you hadn't already figured that out from the whole "my wife is trying to machete my face" incident, then I'm not sure you can be helped. But however friendly these item boxes inexplicably scattered throughout the Baker family residence may seem, they can and will betray you once Lucas gets his hands on them. I thought what we had was special. Unlike my marriage, I suppose.
She's very plain.
And speak of the devil, Mia shows up again when we rescue her and Zoe, the Baker family daughter. Now, Mia gets her own specific rule here, because on top of making some classic mistakes, like agreeing to look after a child in a horror franchise, which almost always ends up with some kind of haunting, or worse.
You gotta pay the troll toll if you want to get into that boy's hole.
She also spends way too much of her screen time trying to murder a man on whom she will inevitably be depending for her rescue. That's right, I saved Zoe. I don't care if it's the bad ending. This woman never cut me in half.
I want a divorce.
Divorce.
I mean, yeah, saving Zoe somehow kills both Zoe and Mia, but worth it. Anyway, once we dealt with a boat full of boat nonsense and a mine full of mine nonsense, we face the game's big bad, Evelyn, a genetically modified bioweapon who is behind all of this, and mostly appears to us as she was when she was still using her medication a few years ago. Unfortunately for her, she rejected modern medicine, and now looks like this. Take your meds, you fool. Turns out I have way less moral issues with shooting a little girl in the face when she looks like an old lady. Especially when said old lady is a giant tentacle monster. Actually, come to think of it, Ethan doesn't seem to have much of an interest in morality at all. I mean, he begins the game by breaking and entering, which in America is like an invitation for someone to cut your head off. Or, I wouldn't know. But what I do know is that, as much punishment as Ethan takes in this game, he really dishes it out sevenfold on Mia and the Baker family. They were all
Welcome to the family.
and offering him their lovely food, and he's just like,
So you have chosen death.
So maybe one key rule is don't mess with the protagonist, especially if they happen to be Ethan. He axes Mia, then shoots her to death before also shooting, running over and blowing up Jack. He then saws Jack in half before later calcifying him in his monstrous form. He eliminates the molded through a variety of bullet-related means, and shoots, stabs, and burns Marguerite and her bug babies before, you guessed it, shooting the shit out of Evelyn as she morphs into the apex from Prey. My point is, if you don't want to end up on the wrong end of a madman and his not insignificant arsenal of murder sticks, perhaps it's best to just stay out of his way. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you learned absolutely nothing from this video, because if you feel like you genuinely took something from this, well, yikes. Either way, I'm glad you stuck around, and if you enjoyed your time here, then please leave a like, or maybe a comment if you had any ideas for future videos. And with that, I'll say see you next time.